Chaos, the unpredictable. To mathematicians, it's a theory that governs seemingly random paths depending on the sensitivity of initial conditions. It's the butterfly flapping its wings causing a tornado on the other side of the world. To the alchemists, it was the prima materia, the fundamental substance that can transform into anything. To the ancient Greeks, it was the primordial dark void before time that birthed the cosmos itself and everything in it. To the psychologists, though, it's a representation of the unconscious, a state of existence before consciousness has arisen. But to us zombies players, it was that strange new story introduced to us in Black Ops 4. Initially marketed as separate from the Ether story, more on this in Chapter 3, we follow the main character, Scarlet Rhodes, as she tries to rescue her father, Alistair, from both a secret cult and himself. Scarlet eventually fails at this and comes to find that both the cult and Alistair have fallen prey to the big bad of the story, Medusa, who has turned them to stone. But what is really happening here, and what does any of it actually mean? At the centre of the Chaos story, ultimately is this search for truth, self-knowledge, and the battle between reality and fantasy. We're introduced to this idea pretty early on when Scarlet is placed in a children's home and she fantasises about her father rescuing her. Now, I myself grew up in foster care and children's homes, and the rescue fantasy can be common at times. Often, it's too difficult for children to accept the painful reality of their parents' abandonment, so they can sometimes create fantasy stories that help easing that pain. If you've ever read or seen the British show Tracy Beaker by Jacqueline Wilson, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. The main character Tracy is a young girl living in a children's home where she frequently tells fantastical stories of her mother being a famous singer that will one day come and get her. This isn't the first time that we've actually seen this within zombies either. During the Ether story, Richtofen and Samantha grew up in an orphanage where Richtofen would often tell the other kids that his dad was a famous scientist, leading the other children to tease him and scribble Teddy as a liar on the wall.
At the orphanage, Edward told everyone his dad was a famous scientist. They scrawled, "Teddy is a liar," on the schoolyard wall.
And again, we actually see this phenomena of fantasy thinking even in adulthood, experienced by Nikolai struggling with accepting the reality of the death of his wife.
Everything else is delusional fantasy that distance you from painful truth.
This is important for a variety of reasons, because not only are we seeing an inversion of the rescue fantasy being played out this time, but instead of her father rescuing her, she's rescuing him. But it also brings into question the reliability of the whole story. It makes me question what is actually really happening and what is fantasy. During the events of the comics, Scarlet makes multiple references to the fact that her father's stories were just that, stories, fiction, with both the first and the final comic in the series beginning with the exact same paragraph. Note the emphasis on the fact that these stories meant the world to her. They became her worldview. I find it no coincidence that the events we play through are all based off the stories that Scarlet had read as a child. In the Danu Temple on 9, you can hear her say this.
Dad used to tell stories about Danu. According to Celtic lore, she was the mother of the earth. Apparently Mama's kind of a bitch.
And on Ancient Evil, you can also hear her say,
Starting to see why Dad kept so many books on Greek mythology. Why he made me read them.
Even as a child in the comics, she asks her father if she can see the saber-toothed tigers on their trip to the museum, which also magically happen to appear later on the map 9. In fact, speaking of coincidences, if you read through the comics, you'll notice an abundance of them. In Alistair's story with Bruno, the Order shoots Alistair's vehicle, crashing into a nearby cave containing symbols that Alistair can illuminate with the Scepter of Ra to discover his next location. What are the chances? And again, in Alistair's story with Diego, whereby Diego manages to run faster than horses somehow to catch up with Alistair in the carriage. Alistair even cracks a joke about this, about being critical of such a thing. In fact, Diego only gives Alistair the artifact he was searching for precisely because the Order had showed up. If I didn't know better, the Order and Alistair seem to be one and the same. The same could be said about a lot actually, but moving on. Written below the arena in 9 is the ancient alchemical maxim, as above, so below, as within, so without. While this phrase has garnered a variety of meanings over time, to really understand it and how it relates to the Chaos story, we need to return to its origins and history, most commonly attributed to the Emerald Tablet, an ancient hermetic text supposedly written by Hermes Trismegistus himself, containing stories of alchemy, astrology, and other esoteric sciences like occultism and magic. all of which are prominent themes that we can see play out within the Chaos story. When we think of alchemy, we conjure up pictures of robed men in basements storing large pots and turning base metals into gold. And while it is true, some alchemists of old believed they really were studying the nature of reality, especially by transforming the materials of the world like lead into gold. For the Hermetic communities though, they were instead concerned with transforming consciousness from its base level understanding into its divine nature to mirror that of the gods at the time. In fact, reaching that understanding was the holy grail of Hermeticism and fundamental gnosis that all strive to achieve. That we as humans were just as divine in nature as the gods above, hence the as above, so below. The gnosis is represented within the Chaos story as the fabled library. Gnosis was the Greek word for knowledge, but not in the logical sense of the word. The Greeks had two separate words for knowledge, and even today, a lot of languages have since kept two separate words for them, one meaning logical information, and the other was knowledge gained only by individual experience. It's basically an allegory for reaching spiritual enlightenment. Similarly to my previous video where I talked about duality, this idea comes up again in Chaos, whereby the Hermetic communities believed in two separate realms, the spiritual and the material. They believed that our souls descended from the spiritual realm into the material realm, and our goal is to see beyond the veil of the material world whilst we're still alive. While both the Hermetics and Gnostics believe in this idea of gnosis and spiritual enlightenment, for the Gnostics this type of gnosis is only achievable after our death because they believed our souls were trapped here by an evil demiurge and we had to escape only through death. We see this play out in the Chaos story when our characters are killed and revived by the Scepter of Ra to be initiated into the Order, growing a vibrant red third eye on their foreheads representing they've achieved a state of spiritual enlightenment. The Order wanted to force this on everyone in the world, killing everyone and ushering in a new time for humanity. Honestly though, it's unclear what Alistair's intentions were other than wanting to desperately access this knowledge. However, he does seem to prefer the trial system and recognises that a person can only achieve this knowledge through their own volition. It seems that the trial system represents achieving this altered state of consciousness through things like meditation, as Alistair says himself that the Sentinel artifact composes of two separate objects, one representing the mind and the other representing the body, and only when those two become harmonised do the trials begin.
Though I myself have not seen the artifact opened, the evidence I've gathered tells across several civilizations, whether it's 2000 BC or 500 AD, the records are... What are the odds? It is incredible. When the artifact is unlocked, the same event, when mind and body are one. The trial, the test of one's worthiness. Once the challenger has announced themselves, is released, transforming the environment around it to the trial's requirements. Gateways are locked, life is and death. Puzzles and riddles must be solved. But the trial does not abandon you to certain death. No. The gods watch over you. Tools of survival are provided. It is as if the trial wants you to succeed. And succeed you must. For once the trial is activated, you are locked in until completion. It is either victory or...
Achieving spiritual enlightenment seems to be an underlying theme across all of zombies, even as far back as Nectar and Toten, with even the words "you must ascend from darkness" scribbled on the walls. Ascension, enlightenment, spiritual awakening, they all mean the exact same thing, that we become aware of the illusionary nature of the world and return to what they consider to be the real world. As the centuries have passed, spiritual movements like that of Hermeticism, Gnosticism, and even Jewish mysticism have birthed new movements and cults like that of Rosicrucianism, with its hundreds of Rose and Cross orders around the world that some still even exist today, as well as the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, a plethora of New Age cults, the Illuminati, Freemasonry. We even see Treyarch mention the Rose and Cross in a cipher within Black Ops 4, and as we should all know by now, Richtofen was apparently a member of the Illuminati. All of these groups lay claim to have some esoteric wisdom passed down through generations and requires its initiates to undergo sometimes gruesome rituals and trials to become a member and access their so-called secret knowledge. But during that time also, a new movement and field of study emerged, offering new modalities for overcoming human suffering and paths to wholeness, that being of psychology. One of the founding fathers of psychology, Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung, had studied alchemy, mythology and religion extensively in the latter part of his life. Releasing multiple collections of work, he casted a new light on alchemy. He admired the alchemists for their work because he saw them not exploring the nature of reality, but the nature of himself. Centuries before such concepts as the human psyche even existed. While the prima materia meant a variety of things to the alchemists, mercury, water, the philosopher's stone, the soul, to Jung he saw the prima materia as being our unconscious true self, and a quest for the philosopher's stone was a quest of self-actualization and individuation. In other words, to reach your highest potential as an individual through uncovering your own secrets and vast knowledge buried in your own subconscious. He saw a lot of alchemy and mythology of old as mere projections of that subconscious. Projection in the sense that we see qualities in others that we ourselves possess. I know what you guys are probably thinking by now. What does this have to do with the Chaos story? Well, remember I said earlier that the events we play through were from the exact same myths that Scarlet had read as a child? As she grew up, she recognised that they weren't real. These stories would have then retreated to her subconscious, and that's exactly what we're playing through. We aren't actually playing inside of a universe, we're instead playing inside of a written story about Scarlet as she's on an unknown quest to discover herself.
Know thyself. I hope you know what you're doing, Scarlet.
Hence the as within, so without. The outer world we play through is a reflection of the inner world. Since we didn't actually see any transformation occur and Chaos didn't get a follow-up, it's difficult to really figure out what is happening concretely. In fact, I can't even tell if this is Scarlet's story or Alistair's, the same way I can't tell if Ether is Samantha or Richtofen's. It could be both. Something interesting that happens later in the Dark Ether story though is that the main character in Vanguard's story, Gabriel Kraft, talks about learning from Alistair's stories, suggesting that his stories exist within the Dark Ether universe. However, he says he couldn't find the artifacts that Alistair had mentioned in the stories. Instead, we see a different variety of artifacts being found in Kraft's story. This idea of artifacts is something Carl Jung also spoke about in a process to achieving individuation called active imagination, whereby you silence your mind and just write whatever comes to you. The thing you write or draw becomes the artifact and is different to everyone. By analysing the artifact, we can come to know ourselves better, and I think that is exactly what's happening here. These are personal stories or personal truths being written within a larger story, hinted at within another cipher in Black Ops 4. In fact, even if you look at Infinite Warfare Zombies, we're playing literally inside of Willard Wyler's stories, and I personally find it quite funny because this idea of projection is literally personified through a projector playing these stories as films on the screen. It definitely would be interesting if the universe in Cold War was the real universe with all the other stories residing within it. The possibilities for Dark Ether and its contents would become infinite. But that's for next video.